Just a little bit before I read your book, I read this novel. It's called The Buddha and the Attic. It's by American-Japanese author called Julie Otsuka. Beautiful, slim novel. It's about Japanese picture brides who were sort of imported from Japan into the American West Coast to partner Japanese men working there. In the early part of the last century, they never met these people. Just by looking at photographs, people have selected girls and girls have been shipped. And it's the story of their crossing, as you say, and their arrival, their lives in America, until the point Pearl Harbor happens and the Japanese are made to disappear from the American West Coast. And she uses this device of, she uses the collective first person for her narrative voice, we. And the entire book is in we. So what she's done in effect is sort of amalgamate the collective individual stories of these hundreds of wives, picture brides, and put this into this very powerful collective narrative. And when I read your book, I realized you had done brilliantly quite the opposite. You took a sort of a chunk of collective history and then you're taking out its individual strands, rescuing them, building them, as many as you can, as much as you can, giving dignity and life to each one of those strands. And I wonder whether it was this sort of, when I read that and I looked at the bibliography of the novelist's book, and I wondered whether that was because she had so much material to work with, whereas you must have felt the responsibility of laying the ground, as it were, of a subject much less researched.
Yeah, I absolutely did feel an ethical responsibility to tell the stories of indentured women. It's not as though the story as a whole hasn't been told before. Their stories were told in documents by British officials, planters, and colonizers, and of course, you know, a few generations of scholars have told the broad outlines of their story, how there weren't a shortage on the plantations, and this empowered them in some limited way. But where I think my approach is different, the approach of a journalist is it's sort of like the difference in the two positions of an accordion, if you will. When a historian or a sociologist, someone who is trained in this way, belongs to the academy, goes into the archives and looks at the stories of all of these women, what he or she will do is look at all hundreds and hundreds of stories and compress so that they can make one or several overarching analyses. What I do that's quite the opposite is pull out the accordion and to let those individual stories breathe as much as possible, to focus on the narrative. Not that there isn't analysis in my book, there is analysis, but the focus is on the storytelling and the narrative. And the density of I welcome the density of detail because I felt that if I could tell, each individual story with as much fact as possible, I would be doing the moral thing. That in a way, a fact is a moral thing. But at the same time, I mean, there's certainly a limitation to the material in the archives. While you might have colonial officials telling the stories of women on the plantations, their role in uprisings, etc., you do not have their stories in their own words because they didn't leave behind their own paper trail, letters and diaries and so forth.
In that sense, I felt yours was a work of imagination as well as a work of history.
Right, because there are so many gaps and silences in the archives. I really had to be creative and use strategies such as asking questions to the point that it might become annoying to a reader or two. And I actually took my cue from a work of fiction, from a short story by the American writer Donald Barthelmy. He wrote a short story called Concerning the Bodyguard. It's written from the perspective of a bodyguard who protects a politician in an unnamed Latin American country. So you have to realize that from this man's perspective, the world is fraught and full of uncertainty and questions. He sees a woman walking down the street. He will think, who is that woman? She's got a handbag. What's in that handbag? Is there a bomb in that handbag? So the story was written almost entirely in question form. There may have been one or two statements in the entire thing, and I figured, well, if he could do it, maybe I could do it too, as a rhetorical strategy. And also, I'm obviously located in this history, I'm not outside of it, and I have an attitude towards the archives and the things that are missing in them. So I thought, the questions could also be playful, and have a certain brazenness at times. It's an attitude. But I mean, my work was definitely informed by works of literature. Mahatma Das was instrumental to me, especially her poem Beast, in the writing of the final chapter, which is about the violence against women in Guyana today. And there's also a historical chapter about violence against women. And she has this really, really very powerful image of the dismemberment of statues, the dismemberment of women's bodies, the dismemberment of colonialism. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, what is that if not cutlass at work?